Hi everyone! Today we're talking about taking temperatures of our potentially hazardous foods using an instant read thermometer like this guy. So this one's digital, but they also have analog ones that have a dial on top like a thermometer, and you read the dial. This one makes it really easy. This is called Thermopop. I'll link it on Canvas. It just has a button that you turn on and it'll tell you the exact temperature once you insert it into the food, about 1.5 to 2 inches. It'll take the read. So I'll be using that later, but first we got to get our food ready to cook. So I'm doing some beautiful Tomahawk pork chops. So this is a cut that usually is reserved for restaurants, but because of COVID, you've been seeing it pop up in grocery stores recently, and my Harris Teeter has run them on sale for $7.99 a pound, which is about half the price of a beef steak. So this is the equivalent in pork of what a ribeye would be in beef. And they're called Tomahawk because they have the really long rib bone attached, which has a little bit of meat on it. And when you sear these in a pan, all of that gets really browned and golden and delicious. So they're kind of enjoyable to kind of chew on that, almost like a corn cob. So they're sitting in what's called a brine. And a brine is simply a mixture of water, sugar, salt, herbs, and spices. And the brine does two things. It's going to add flavor with the fresh thyme and the peppercorns that are in there, and there's some apple juice in this brine. And it also tenderizes the meat. So that is a nice thing to do for pork chops because they can tend to be a little bland and a little dry. This is something you just do about 2 hours ahead, and you can do it in a Ziploc bag or in a container like I have it. And I'll include the recipe for the brine in our pork chop recipe. Once it's sat for 2 hours, you're gonna take it out of the brine. I'm gonna just let it drip off over the container, and I'm gonna dry the pork chops off on some paper towels. And that drying of them is gonna prevent them from steaming when they go into the pan instead of searing. And we want them to sear to get a crust, because that's delicious. Anytime we get a little bit of browning on meats or any kind of proteins like mushrooms, well, mushrooms aren't a protein, but they brown nicely too, you get more flavor. So we're gonna get a little bit of complex umami flavor, which is that delicious savoriness in food. So I'm drying them off so that any water that would have been on the surface doesn't turn to steam and prevent them from browning. So we want a dry surface into a hot pan so we get nice browning. So I'm just going to flip them over, pat the other side dry, and do the other one. You don't want to leave them in a brine longer than the recommended amount of time for the cut you're making, which for these thick pork chops is 2 hours, because it'll make them a funny texture. The meat can get a little bit mushy, so a little bit of time is good, but too much time is bad. Now, because this is raw pork, I have to be careful about cross-contamination, right? So there's potential harmful pathogens on this meat or in this meat, and I want to use one set of utensils for my raw meat, and then once it's in the pan and it's starting to cook, I'm going to switch to a different set of tongs to take it out of the pan. And any surface that this could come into contact with is going to have to be sanitized, so including my hands after touching it. So once these are dry, I'll go and clean up, and then we'll come back at the stove and we'll get them cooking. Beautiful.